let's wrap this series up with the suspects. Take note that this video will be somewhat opinionated. Actually, it's gonna be very opinionated. Okay, so I picked out 9 suspects in total and divided them up in 3 different groups. The first 3 in the group I decided to call the bad, because while they are known as suspects, they have been pretty much debunked as suspects. Anyway, let's start with the bad, and first out we have the thick American man named Dr. Francis Tumblety. Francis was first accused of being Saucy Jack by an inspector named John Littlechild. A journalist digging for info on suspects contacted the investigator in 1913 and received a letter back saying that among the suspects, and a very likely one, was a Dr. T, who was an American quack named Tumblety. Apparently Tumblety had been arrested several times for gross indecency with other men, and he also had a seething hatred for prostitutes. And he had openly denounced women, especially fallen women, as he apparently said it, which I guess means prostitutes. I mean, it's a vague term. Anyway, Inspector Littlechild was wrong. Francis Tumblety is a very unlikely suspect as Jack the Ripper. After he returned to New York, he became somewhat famous, or rather infamous, as he was being accused of being Jack the Ripper. Several newspapers stated that all the people that knew Francis said they thought he was capable of being the killer, but that just wasn't true, as most of them said he was a gentleman who wasn't capable of being Jack. And I know people always say that about serial killers. You know, there's always some buffoon with a shocked expression stating how they never thought this man could have done this. It was so nice. You would think people would have learned by now. So another thing that speaks against Francis as the Ripper is the fact that his appearance doesn't match the witness description of Jack at all, and it's possible he never even visited Whitechapel at all. It was also said he had a collection of female uteri? Pick the right pronunciation in the comments. But the man who stated this was deemed a pretty unreliable witness. Add to this that police released him on bail, which probably wouldn't have happened if he actually was a suspect. And American police never extradited him, which you'd think they would if they actually thought he was Jack. And to say one more thing about Inspector Littlechild, he never had any part in the Ripper investigation, so I don't know why his opinion was held so highly. Next up, we got James Maybrick. In 1992, a man claimed to have been given a diary by his friend, and he stated the diary was written by Jack the Ripper. James Maybrick had been a cotton merchant, and in 1889 he was poisoned by his wife, and the arsenic had killed him. The suspicions pointed towards him, however, came from the contents of this diary. One sentence in particular was considered by some an admission of guilt. The sentence said, "I give my name that all know of me, so history do tell, what love can do to a gentle man born. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Other than this, the diary had descriptions of the murders. And in the description of the murder of Mary Kelly, several statements was just flat out fucking wrong. They had basically been copy-pasted from contemporary newspapers. Among other things, it was stated that he had spread Mary Kelly's body parts all over the room and hung them up like Christmas decorations, which of course wasn't the case, as most of Mary's body parts were confined to her bed area. And he also stated he had placed her cut-off breasts on the table, but they had actually been placed beneath her corpse. These are just a few among many inaccuracies, and the man who brought the book forward later came out and admitted it was a hoax. But he then redacted his admission, and his ex-wife claimed the diary had been in her family since World War II. Examinations of the diary also stated that it looked to be from the late 1800s, but they needed to conduct further research in order to confirm the time period. Just the inaccuracies in the diary alone tells me this diary was full of shit. It's fake. And let's take the last of the bad. Walter Sickert. In 2002, a very popular book about Jack the Ripper was published named Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper, Case Closed. In this book, author Patricia Cornwell stated to have used modern forensics to crack the case of Jack the Ripper, and she claimed the suspect was Walter Sickert. In her book, she claimed Walter had been impotent after having suffered several surgeries called surgeries of the fistula of the penis. Now, I don't know what a fistula is, but that sounds absolutely fucking horrible. Almost makes my cock cringe. Anyway, sorry for my indecent remarks there. It just slips out sometimes. You know, I refuse to censor myself, so I'm gonna leave that in. So apparently he had all these surgeries which awoke a hatred within him, and her opinion was that he and his limp dick took out their frustration on prostitutes, but none of that is actually true. He had a wife and several mistresses. According to them, his dick worked just fine. That penis fisting surgery wasn't really a thing, as where she stated it happened, they only did surgeries like that on the anus. I'm serious. This famous writer, boasting about her good research, either couldn't distinguish a penis from a butthole, or was just too lazy, or just thought a little white lie didn't do anything. You see, she was working with the goal of finding evidence to corroborate her theory. That's not how you find a killer. You don't focus in on a killer and look for evidence to support your theory, suspect. You gotta let the evidence lead you, otherwise you're not looking for the right person, you're just trying to prove your own theory, and when you do that you can easily dismiss things that could be vital. Other than those inaccuracies, a reason he was suspected by her is that he was fascinated with crime, as he had drawn a painting resembling a Jack the Ripper victim on the autopsy table. With that logic, I suppose me and all of you watching is probable serial killers as well, which you probably are, you know. I'm not saying that some serial killers doesn't obsess or have an interest in true crime books and shit like that, but of the readers of true crime, the readers that are actually dangerous is so small it's not even worth mentioning. She also claimed his writing matched the letters sent from Jack the Ripper. Okay, first off, there's one letter that could be linked to his writing, and that was the letter to Dr. Openshaw, which was confirmed to be fake. And none of the other letters have actually been confirmed as coming from Jack either. Okay, we're done with this. Let's go to the next group. If the bad was about the suspects, that has pretty much been debunked. The good is about 3 suspects that haven't been debunked and that I think on the list of suspects are the likeliest. That doesn't mean I think one of them are the killer. I will say what I think at the end of the video. So let's just start. And let's start with Thomas Cutbush. Cutbush was a man favored by the media at the time, but he was dismissed as a suspect by one of the investigators. Although this investigator wasn't the brightest, he had named 3 suspects of his own, but he said many inaccurate things about all 3, and I've only included one of his suspects in this video, but we're gonna talk about that suspect next. So Thomas Cutbush was put into an insane asylum in 1891 and was referred to as an imbecile. The thing that makes him interesting though is that he was delusional and a danger to others. He was, in other words, a very violent person, not prone to suicide, only dangerous to others. He said some strange things like that he could feel sulfur in his left lung, and I don't have more than that. He was, according to my findings in Whitechapel at the time, and a violent and delusional person, pretty much how I would describe Jack the Ripper. But to be real with you, I don't think he did it. But he is an interesting suspect for sure. Aaron Kosminski. If you're familiar with the Ripper case, you might recognize this name. Kosminski is one of the most popular suspects as Jack the Ripper, but there is some inaccuracies in the way he has often been portrayed. Kosminski, a Polish Jew living in London during the time of the murders, has often been described as a very violent and dangerous person, as well as having a deep hatred for women. Basically an 1800s incel. And it was also said at the time that he was put into a lunatic asylum in 1889, where he died. Kosminski was actually put into a lunatic asylum in 1891, but he had showed signs of insanity in the late 1880s. He had suffered some severe disillusions and preferred to eat from the gutter rather than accepting food from others. He was paranoid and schizophrenic, but it has been noted that he was in fact not very violent. He spent many years in the loony bin, while it was originally said that he died shortly after being put into the asylum in 1891. He actually died in 1919, and the only sign of violence he ever showed was when he attempted to strike an attendant with a chair. Other than that, he wasn't known to be dangerous. There's not much more than that to say about Kosminski. There is no real evidence against him, except for the opinions of two of the lead investigators at the time. If you ask me, it's possible, but I don't think he ever was Jack the Ripper. The last of the good. Frederick Deeming. Deeming is a very interesting suspect, and his story almost deserves its own episode of H's Murder. Frederick was executed in Melbourne, Australia after murdering his own wife and attempting to cover the murder up, but before he died, he confessed to being Jack the Ripper. Of course, that isn't enough to go on, but he did travel a lot in the late 1880s and could possibly have been in Whitechapel at the time of the murders. He also killed another one of his wife in England, as well as her 4 young children. He had buried one of his victims under cement in his house, and I don't think I'm gonna go into it more than that. I may want to cover him and his story in its entirety at some other point, so I'm gonna save some gravy in the freezer, if you know what I mean. Okay, so yeah, again, no actual evidence, just theories and more fucking theories, and to be honest with you, does it even matter anymore? Even if we found out who Jack the Ripper was, what could we do? The case is 130 years old. Of course, there's always a great need for knowing the answers to things. That's why mysteries like these intrigue us so much. Jack the Ripper is that figure in the long cloak and old hat who moves silently in the mist during the night and slashes your throat with a huge grin on his face. It's like Bigfoot, except it's real. Anyway, I have one more group to bring up, and let's just move through these. The last and final group is the stupid. Now you may wonder what I mean by the stupid. Or maybe you don't wonder that at all, it's pretty self-explanatory, but essentially it's 3 of the dumbest suspects in the case, and first out is Mary Pearcey, a woman who in 1890 was hung for murdering her lover's wife and her baby. In 1939 she was proposed as a possible suspect as Jack the Ripper and has also been known as Jill the Ripper. Are you fucking kidding me? Do I have to explain why I don't believe she could be Jack the Ripper? I mean, what about the eyewitness reports? Are we just ignoring those? And even if we are, how many female serial killers do we know that committed such gruesome mutilations? I mean, we have our Eileen Wuornos and what's her name, Guinness, but those are pretty rare even for female serial killers. They usually use poison. I don't even know why I'm trying to explain this. I don't know how much lesbian hanky-spanky prostitutes in London used to get into, but for some reason I think it was kinda taboo to do the old scissoring back then. And at least one victim was approached by what they thought was a customer, Mary Kelly. She invited her killer into her bedroom, and an eyewitness saw her taking a man into her bedroom. You know what, let's move on to the next stupid suspect, Dr. Neil Cream. Dr. Cream was a serial killer operating after Jack the Ripper in London, America, and possibly a couple other countries. Dr. Neil also killed working gals, and before being hung for his crimes he exclaimed that he was Jack the Ripper. The only thing Dr. Cream shared with Sausage Jack was the title as serial killer. Dr. Cream poisoned his victims. I've never heard of a serial killer that goes from one of the most intimate MOs to such a distanced one. There is no evidence for Dr. Cream as Jack the Ripper, but if you ask me, the psychology of serial killers and how they operate is enough to discredit this man's last-minute attempts at more infamy. And lastly, we have h.h. Holmes. That's right, the guy that had his own sadistic murder castle in Chicago where he murdered and tortured hundreds of people in hidden rooms and walls that he had built into his hotel. First off, let me say that's not true. I know everyone says it is, but the sources for those claims come from sensationalizing newspapers at the time. H.H. Holmes was certainly a killer, but he never killed 100 people, or 1,000 for that matter. He had a few confirmed murders on his hand, and let me tell you, they weren't sadistic or perverse in nature. H.H. Holmes was a criminal. He ran a criminal enterprise. The easiest way to describe it is this. H.H. Holmes is not a Hannibal Lecter. He is more of a Walter White. There is a great page for more info on the inaccuracies of Holmes. Now I hope you're not mad at me, it's not your fault if you never heard the truth about old Herbert before. I remember hearing it for the first time as well. But there is extensive research that supports this, and I'm gonna link a great page for this in the description, so please check that out if you doubt my claims. Now as far as him being Jack the Ripper is just absurd. There is extensive proof that he was in America during the Ripper murders, and one more thing. People like to label Holmes as America's first serial killer. He wasn't America's first serial killer. America's first serial killers were the Harp brothers, running around killing people in the late 1700s. That's almost 100 years before old Herbert. Before we pop this series in the back of its head and bury it in the yard, I just want to let you know which suspect I think Jack the Ripper was. So, who is it? It's none of them. I don't think Jack is on that list at all. I think he lived in Whitechapel and was a pretty normal guy. I just think the police screwed up their investigation too early. It's similar to a Swedish case we have here where our Prime Minister was shot to death on the streets of Stockholm in 1986. And the killer ran away and has still not been caught. The police focused in on their suspect, and by the time they realized they were focusing on the wrong one, the trail had gone cold. And that's it. I hope you weren't too annoyed with my cynical opinions on everything, and if you were, that's too bad. Other than that, I want to thank you guys for your support. Your kind comments mean a lot to me. I'll be back in about a week. I don't have a specific date, it's just that it usually takes me a week or so I'll see you then with a new video and a brand new case. Thank you for watching, and good night.